Nicholas Walterstorff has served as the president of the American Philosophical Association and president of the Society of Christian Philosophers. He is a top philosopher who wrote extensively on aesthetics, epistemology, political philosophy, philosophy of religion, metaphysics, and education. In the academic area of faith and reason, and together with Alvin Plantinga and William Alston, Walterstorff pioneered the new discipline known as Reformed epistemology in Christian scholarship.
I'm a Christian and was reared Christian and have been that for my entire life. I'm a philosopher. I've spent my adult life as a philosopher. Yes, I certainly have thought and written about a number of distinct areas in philosophy. I have consistently and throughout tried to think and write and speak as a Christian philosopher. In fact, when I look back, it's been my concern to illuminate concrete life, art, justice, liturgy, things like that. So not just abstractions, but to illuminate the concreteness of our human existence. Early on, I worked on metaphysics, and there I was, how do you want to describe it, internally propelled. But after that, I have in good measure, in large measure, responded to things that dropped on my doorstep. Unanticipated things, surprising things. That's why I've talked about many different topics in philosophy. I have written about, and a book of mine is coming out on philosophical reflections on liturgy and worship, for example. I didn't know anything about liturgy at the time. I never took a course in college or university in philosophy of art or aesthetics, but I was interested in art. The person who was teaching the philosophy of art course here at Calvin, Tunis Prince, retired. The department needed somebody to teach it, so they tapped me and said, "You're interested in art, Nick. Why don't you start teaching philosophy of art?"
This modern philosopher has written prolifically about a variety of issues, such as social justice, the philosophy of art, and epistemology. At the beginning of his academic career, how did he discern God's calling to serve in this way?
I was a student here at Calvin College. That was an enormously important and formative period in my life. Three very influential teachers at Calvin College: Harry Jolema, Henry Staub, Henry Zylstra. So those three figures were very formative, and they gave us a vision.
Is life just about working and eating? The God who created us wants us to feed on His Word and walk according to His ways, even when it is incredibly difficult.
When I compare what's happening now to 50 years ago, the economizing of almost everything, education, to some extent is happening here. The liberal arts are declining, and computer science is in, and medicine and so forth. So the economizing of society. I think a college or a university, colleges and universities should be where the intellectual life of the nation is celebrated and focused and carried on and advanced and so forth. And if you just turn it into a cog in the machine. And the other thing is the politicizing of almost everything, and especially in this country, in the US, of Christianity. There's hardly any independent voice left. So those are two big tendencies that I notice: the politicizing of almost everything and the economizing of things. So what I've tried in my career to do is to resist that, to invite people to look at and think about art and about liturgy and about justice and so forth, and not to politicize and economize everything. We are created by God to be creatures who can arrive at understanding, who can dissolve some of the mystery and so forth. And that's what education should ultimately be about, and it should inspire awe in students at important points, and horror at other points at what human beings have done to human beings and so forth, and not just, how can I hold a job?
in developing Reformed epistemology with Plantinga and others. Waltersdorf could not avoid the intellectual tradition of his so-called soulmate, Thomas Reid.
In the center, Al Plantinga and I were beginning to work out the project of Reformed epistemology, an anti-foundationalist understanding of proper belief, and so forth. I studied the history of modern philosophy, of course, but it was the practice of almost everybody to take Locke, Berkeley, Hume, and then just forget about Reid. So I never read a word of Reid before. I don't remember why I began to read Reid. But I felt after 20 pages, whatever, that this was a soulmate. And what made me feel that he was a soulmate? Reid is dealing with the epistemological questions of late 20th century analytic philosophers, dealing with beliefs, and then which beliefs constitute knowledge, which beliefs are true, and what makes them true, which beliefs are rational, and so forth. He was asking an earlier question. How do we manage to get items of reality in mind well enough to have beliefs about them? And what is it that accounts for the formation of beliefs? So that's what Reid was up to.
The 20th century debate between Christians and political liberalism was about public reason and religious freedom. Waltersdorf openly admits that John Rawls' position is completely infeasible.
In the late 70s, as I recall, John Rawls, political philosopher at Harvard, published his Political Liberalism. Rawls's position is that religious people, everybody, when debating basic issues of politics, not where the streetlight should be located and so forth, but basic issues of politics, should appeal to what he called public reason, shared public reason, that is the fundamental ideas incorporated in the idea of liberal democracy. The figure that we were inspired by, the intellectual figure that and religious figure that we were inspired by at Calvin College was the Dutchman Abraham Kuyper. That we each should express as cogently and carefully and responsibly as we can our view of politics that our particular worldview leads us to hold, and then discuss it together, and then finally take a vote. So this Rawlsian business of everybody finding some shared public reason just always seemed thoroughly implausible to me.
What motivated him to shift from epistemology and analytical philosophy to the field of political theology and offering a Christian perspective on love and justice?
I vividly remember flying home on that first trip and on the way thinking, my life is falling into fragments. My life is just falling into fragments. And for a couple of years, that concerned me, until one day I was reading around in the Old Testament, and I noticed, as we all do, the word peace. I knew that this was a translation of the Hebrew shalom, so I decided to find out more. I didn't find the commentaries on the word books very helpful, so what I did is I read every passage in which the word shalom occurs and looked at the context. And I concluded that in present-day English, the best translation is flourishing, not peace, but flourishing. And justice was part of shalom, the sort of ground condition. And art was part of shalom. So for me, from that awakening, what holds all these things together are liturgy, justice, is that they're all dimensions of shalom, of flourishing.
According to Waltersdorf, to be a philosopher and to deny the scars left in our lives by tragedy and suffering is not only dishonest, but out of line.
So you don't see the human being behind the scholar, usually. Scholars like to protect themselves in that way, to be non-revealing, non-revealing. Well, in the case of Eric's death, that was impossible for me. He died in a mountain climbing accident just across the German-Austrian border in Austria. His landlady called me, and I immediately went to Europe, plane to Luxembourg, then train to Munich, where Eric was studying, then back to Luxembourg. When I got back to Luxembourg from Munich, I had maybe 6 hours before the plane for the US took off. And I'd taken some books along to read, but I couldn't read them. I couldn't read them. I couldn't focus on what they were saying. So I began writing. And you know, I had the sense that I wasn't searching for words, but that the words came. And I just took them in. Maybe nothing of what I wrote in the Luxembourg airport found its way, in that form anyway, into the final book. I do remember that the first time I saw copies of it was when I happened one day to go down to the Erdmans plant, and there was a wooden pallet with the stacks of them. And then I felt, oh, what have I done? What have I done? I had the image of lying on a hospital gurney, flat on my back, my intestines opened up, and people walking by and gawking and gaping.
In his book, Walthersdorf opened himself up for people to glimpse his experience with grief after losing his son Eric. He wrote, "I shall look at the world through tears. Perhaps I shall see things that, dry-eyed, I could not see."
So how to live with grief is the question. The first thing I would say is own the grief. That is, don't disown it. Don't try to remove it from your identity. That's part of who I am. That's part of my identity. It's not all of it, part of it. I say that we should own our grief because to disown it, I understand grief as happening when we are attached to something, bonded to something, a person, a house, a job, whatever, and the person dies, the job is no longer there, the house is burned, whatever. That's when grief happens. So grief and love come together. It's the love that causes the grief. Death is bad, and my love for our son, Eric's death was bad and evil, and my love for Eric was a good thing. So I've got to acknowledge that and own it. Be honest. Own the grief. You will have people around you telling you, oh, get over it, don't cry over spilled milk, get on with things, and so forth. Do your best to ignore it. And then the other thing I would say is this, be patient. Not only did my son Eric die, but also a big chunk of my own life was ripped out because a lot of my own life had to do with Eric. When was he going to call? Was there a letter from him today? When is his graduation going to be? You know, and all of that now floats loose. It's just been ripped out. So you have to learn to live around this gap in your life. And that takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. And in my view, there's no schedule for it.
As a philosopher, Walthersdorf refused to deny the marks left by tragedy and suffering experienced in his life.
It is good to give thanks to the Lord, to sing praises to your name, O Most High, to declare your steadfast love in the morning and your faithfulness by night, to the music of the lute and the harp, to the music of the lyre. For you, O Lord, have made me glad by your works. At the works of your hands I sing for joy. How great are your works, O Lord! Your thoughts are very deep. That speaks for me.